All right, what a day. I think it's been a phenomenal day, and everybody here would agree with me. So I am here. I feel really great being here to introduce this coming team who is going to present today. So just to give you a little bit of background, we at GIRAD were really fortunate to solicit and secure the resources to take 6 graduate and undergraduate students to Burundi for an experiential educational research trip. So I'd like to shout out to all the sponsors who covered most of the expenses in this trip, as well as the research team who volunteered their time and resources putting this plan together and implementing it amazingly, including all these phenomenal students that you see in front of you. So in this trip, students were able to be part of a great research project, collecting personal testimonies from survivors of the silenced 1972 genocide in Burundi, which is a big research endeavor that's led by our own Dr. Janine Terhegeza. And the stories will be documented and archived at NEIU library. So these students will be reflecting on their trip to Burundi and their experiences while witnessing survivors' experiences and emotions during their interview. So I have a quick introduction. I'm going to briefly read their bios. Nasima Naud, right there, is an undergraduate student at NEIU. She's majoring in sociology and minoring in African and African American studies, as well as child advocacy studies. She is a senior and is due to graduate this summer. She hopes to pursue a master's in social work. Great. After her undergraduate studies, she has currently been working at Chicago Park District for the past year as recreational leader. She has experience working with student clubs and has recently been selected to work with the Great Lakes Fast Fund. Sarah Dandeles. All right. She is an English language teacher with an arts, culture, and nonprofit management background, an MA candidate in Northeastern Illinois University TESOL program. She is an instructor with NEIU's Intensive English Program, SAL. Since 2021, she has also worked with NEIU's Genocide and Human Rights research on Africa and the Diaspora Center as a program manager for the pre-departure orientation for all Fulbright program guarantees to Sub-Saharan Africa. Her all right. G. Davis is a driven senior at NEIU, pursuing her degree in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies with a minor and focus in LGBTQ and disability studies. Their passion for promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion is evident through their dedication to understanding and advocating for the rights of marginalized communities. After graduation, G plans to pursue a master's in social work, to become a therapist and work directly with individuals and communities in need. I'm loving this. If you're having a hard time to tell, I cannot wait to welcome you all in social work eventually. Barbara Jones. Hi, Barb. Is currently a graduate student in Urban Community Studies Master's Program. She is a recent graduate of NEIU with a bachelor's degree in Urban Community Studies, with a bachelor's degree in Interdisciplinary Studies with a minor in African and African American studies. A resident of Chicago, Ms. Jones is passionate about working with underserved adolescent African American male. She is in the planning stage of launching a nonprofit organization that features a school for boys ages 10 through 13. Leslie Westerberg is in her second year of 3-year master's in social work program in school social work from NEIU. Her first master's degree is in library science, which is earned from Dominican University in 2010. As a former librarian, she's especially passionate about reading books and storytelling. She believes that we all have our own story to share and encourages and supports her students in sharing their own stories. Last but not least, we have Susie Bonilla. She is not here because she's not feeling well, but I would read her brief bio. She is a graduate student at NEIU and will be graduating with her MSW in May 2023. She earned a bachelor's in justice studies with a minor in social work from NEIU in 2011. She currently works with the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services and has worked with children and families for 13 years. Thank you so much. It's your stage now.
Ms. Barb Jones is going to be introducing our but before we do our introductions, if you don't mind, I was hoping that we could all just briefly say really quick why we wanted to take this trip to Burundi. I know we all had very meaningful experiences, different reasons why we applied to go. So if you don't mind, Barbara.
Okay. This is already turned on? Okay. Non-technology. Okay, hello everyone and welcome to Northeastern Illinois Center for Genocide and Human Rights Research in Africa and the Diaspora. And thank you for the honor of your presence. Our group recently traveled to Burundi, Africa, where we conducted research and interviewed a number of citizens of Burundi to discuss and examine the massive genocide that occurred in the country in 1972. The interviews were gripping, compelling, and impassioned. Burundi is a stunningly picturesque country that has two capital cities, Bujumbura and Gitega. Green peas and bananas are staples of the country, and banana beer is popular and brewed locally. Today we are presenting reflections from hearing reflections of what we did while we were there, of the stories that we heard while we were there. And pardon me, because I should have copied this and I did not. See if I can get the rest of it. So the purpose is to discuss and bring an awareness to what happened and possibly come up with solutions that would optimistically present ways to avoid these types of occurrences from happening in the future. A multitude of people were silenced about what occurred. For roughly 50 years, they were not allowed to speak of the atrocity that occurred. Their voices are now allowed to be heard. You are encouraged to write questions as there will be a question and answer session after we present. I am Barbara Jones, again, a recent grad of NEIU, currently a grad student in the Urban Community Studies program and a contributing panelist. It was truly an honor to be a part of the interviewing process, to listen to and hear the stories of the survivors. Their stories are heartfelt and painful, and at times they were deeply emotional, so much so that it was difficult to listen to. The interviewees that came forth to tell their stories were very brave because there's still an underlying uneasiness present. Essentially, all that came forth endured the trauma of loss of their loved ones, family members, and friends. I lost it. But anyway, it was truly an honor to actually just have the opportunity to go to Africa, to visit Africa. If I could describe how it felt, I would say it was indescribable, seriously. Just touching down on the motherland was like nothing I could ever even imagine what happened in the United States. We were welcomed with just the utmost passion. Just, you would have thought we were rock stars. Seriously, just the most unreal welcome. But hopefully this conference and everything that everybody does will bring some type of, at least the beginning, the start of a solution to this, to what's going on. And, you know, it's not outward. It's not an outward thing that you see. We know that there's that uneasiness and that untold story there, but it's there and something needs to be done so that it does not culminate into another conflict. That's it for me. Oh, why did I want to go to the movie? To be perfectly honest, what do they call it? Your bucket list? It was always on my bucket list to travel to Africa at some point. Okay, but now, in the way that my trip happened was so haphazard, it was crazy. I wanted to take a class to get my minor in African and African American studies, but it was not being offered in the fall. So I had to go to Dr. Bethia to get permission to take a different class to cover for it. That class ended up being with Dr. Isetu. Dr. Isetu brought up the trip in one of the classes. When she said that, she said, email me later. So anybody that's interested. Before she could get it off her lips, I was emailing. Like, I want to go now. So that's how I ended up even going. But I have always wanted to travel to Africa, simply because I believe that my heritage, that my ancestry is there somewhere. I just don't know who or where or how it is. That's something I'm going to have to, since I know how to research now that I'm a college student, maybe I'll research that. Okay, so I'm done now for real.
Hi everyone, I'm G. I'm super nervous, but excited. So my reason for going on the trip, one of my professors, Dr. Perlow, had nominated me for the trip, and honestly, it was just an experience or an opportunity that I couldn't turn down for the price. Shout out to whoever funded it. We really appreciate that.
Yes.
I mean, I got to go to the motherland, like Barb said. For me, the biggest thing about the trip was the presence and practice of Ubuntu. For me, Ubuntu is a relatively new concept. I learned the word and its meaning last semester at a lecture I attended here at NEIU. Ubuntu is a philosophy used in many African cultures that speaks to the interconnectedness of humanity. I am because we are. Ubuntu emphasizes the importance of community and the idea that we are linked to one another. This is my first trip out of the country, and I was traveling with 9 people I had only met via Zoom. So I was super anxious, and I honestly had no idea what to expect. And let me tell you, reading about another country does not do it justice. All my reading and YouTube surfing, coupled with the intent of the trip, led me to expect a few things. I knew I was going to be discussing and hearing about the complex, emotional, and painful history of Burundi and its people. I knew we were going to meet many new folks. I also knew that Burundi is said to be the poorest country in Africa and that it's filled with lush greenery. The YouTube and articles I read did not prepare me for the warm welcome I received when arriving in Burundi. Never in my life have I been greeted with such kindness, smiles, welcoming words and gestures, a bouquet for each of us filled with flowers and fruit, and later that evening, a home-cooked meal. We felt like family. The first day really set the tone for the remaining days. How the Burundian people cared for us and each other was such a beautiful thing to see and experience. After our warm welcome, there were so many small and big practices of Ubuntu that I saw and felt. There were a few that really stuck out to me, and I want to share those with y'all. The first is when we visited the source of the Nile. It's pictured here. We were all gathered around the vans in a parking lot, and a child came up to one of the vans and started to play with it. We had a couple interpreters with us, and one of them grabbed the child by the ear, said something in Kirundi, and sent the child off. I immediately thought, you can't do that in the States. I expanded on that in telling them that correcting someone's child is just often frowned upon. I was later informed that in Burundi, the child belongs to everyone, and they had the responsibility to the children and everyone else. Ubuntu thinking is complete opposite of the way we tend to move and think about each other in the States. In general, and this isn't true for all communities and people, but we are highly individualistic. Every person for themselves, don't correct my child. Better be careful walking alone at night. Pick yourself up by the bootstraps type of thinking. That is not the case in Burundi. I remember one evening after dark, Susie, who unfortunately isn't here, and I wandered up to the market to get some snacks. There were people lined up waiting for gas, folks playing cards, and people just hanging out kikiing. Upon returning, we were both relieved and surprised at how safe and comfortable we felt as femme-presenting people just wandering around the city. We rarely feel that way in Chicago. This last story is something that really stuck with me and came from one of the interviews we did. While listening to the stories that the people have lived through the 1972 genocide and the 1993 Civil War, someone mentioned sharing dinner with a person who had murdered someone in their family. This is a really hard concept for us to grasp. Why would you want to share dinner with someone who harmed yourself or you and your community? I thought, how else do you move forward? How can you openly apply Ubuntu without forgiving? I am because we are. Overall, my trip to Burundi was an unforgettable experience. I came away with a newfound appreciation for the power of community, the beauty of other cultures, and the importance of kindness and generosity in our interaction. As the people in Burundi demonstrate so well, we're all connected, and it is through these connections that we can find joy and fulfillment in life. Thanks.
So Miss Susie was not able to make it. She's not feeling too well today, but what she did do was she provided us with a video of what she wanted to say about her experience, especially from the lens of being a social worker who worked with children and family for 13 years. On the next slide, we'll see the video where she discusses 3 pivotal questions. What is trauma? What happens after something traumatic happens to someone? And how do we begin? You might have to press play from the computer though, actually. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Just want to thank you for being here for this conference. And so I'm going to talk about my experience in Burundi. And so during my trip to Burundi, our research team had specific duties, and my duty was to record the stories of people. And as I sat there recording the stories and listening to what people reported, a lot of it was from traumatic events that happened to them in their lives. Some told stories about, their family members being killed, and some at many different stages of their lives. Many reported that these events happened while they were children, and many could not understand what was happening at the time and how difficult it was to deal with these traumatic events, even as adults. One particular story that stood out was one that was told about a woman whose husband was killed, and her home was also destroyed. And she was running for her life, and she had to strap her baby up in the back and wrap her around and run for her life. And as she's running, someone picked up a spear and threw the spear, which struck her baby and killed her baby instantly. And she had to keep running and leave her baby behind. It was a very traumatic experience for this woman. And can you imagine the intensity of this situation? Well, it was a real situation, and the intense pain of this woman losing her home, her husband, and now her child. Like, how does she begin to overcome this intense pain, right? And people were forbidden to speak of such events, and many people in Burundi suffered due to this genocide, causing a lot of pain and suffering and trauma. And so what I want to discuss is trauma and what is trauma? And so trauma is the long-lasting emotional response that often results from living through a distressing event. Trauma is a term used to describe the challenging emotional consequences that living through a distressing event can have for an individual. Experiencing a traumatic event can harm a person's sense of safety, their sense of self, the ability to regulate their emotions, and it may also be difficult to navigate through relationships. And so what happens after traumatic events? So long after traumatic events occur, people with trauma can feel shame, helplessness, they can feel powerless, and they also may have intense fear. And so how do we begin to heal from trauma, right? And just to be clear, like, there is no length of time that people have to recover from trauma. Trauma can last a lifetime. And however, there are some things that can help to begin to heal from that trauma and traumatic events that people have suffered. And the first thing is to give yourself time. Give yourself time to process what has happened, what is happening, just so that, you are aware of what's going on, and try to make a plan for yourself, right? And then talk about the traumatic events. Sometimes it's easier, or I would say it lifts up a lot of weight off of you when you start to talk about these events, right? You can speak to others about what has happened, others that have experienced the same traumatic events that you've had. And, you can become like a support for each other. You can also, if possible, you can also have like group therapy or individual therapy if possible. From my experience working with children and families, I have encountered that being able to speak about your trauma instead of holding it in helps you relieve some of the shame and helplessness that people feel. Speaking about your trauma gives back a sense of control. As you make progress, you become resilient. It allows you to breathe again and take it one day at a time. It may not fix what happened in the past, but it helps you move forward, right? And in this case, it's been about 50 years since the genocide in Burundi, and people had just started to talk about these traumatic events that happened to them as children and adults. And being able to process these events can begin to heal the trauma that people have suffered. I know that it is something that will require a lot of support, being that we all have cultural differences. But the important thing is to begin to process these traumas, right? And Burundi is such a beautiful country, and its people are so welcoming. And I feel it's time for Burundi to breathe and become the resilient people and country that they are. And this is what I took from my experience in Burundi. I hope that, it's the beginning of a process. And I really enjoyed my trip in Burundi and I learned a lot. Thank you.
You might just have to have.
Hi, everyone. I just want to thank you for being here.
Okay. The next slide.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nasima Dawood. The title of my portion of the presentation is pronounced Umutima wa Afrika, which means the heart of Africa in Kirundi, which is the native language of Burundi. It's also the name of a cool song written by someone by the name of Sylvester Siza, according to my Burundian friends. Okay. Let me start by saying from the moment that I landed to the moment that I left, it was hard for me to fathom what my eyes and my heart were telling me. In Chicago, it seems somewhat normal for me to not feel or be too distracted with trying to live to feel anything. In Burundi, I was able to feel again, a rehumanization, if you will. My gray world turned unspeakably vibrant before my eyes. Just after arriving at the airport, I was already a sobbing mess from being greeted by Dr. Janine's family with beautiful flowers, fruits, and love. It felt so unfamiliar for me to feel so honored in such a way. Before that, I couldn't even tell you when the last time I received flowers was. The boys of Buta was a time that I felt the most emotional, and I was feeling a lot of things. So in Buta, which is I think a separate like province in Burundi, I think the military, if I'm remembering correctly, stormed a boarding school of, I think it was like elementary to high school age boys. And we're telling them to separate ethnically, Hutus and Tutsis, and they wouldn't separate. They locked hands and they refused to separate, so they massacred them all. Buta was one of the most memorable experiences that I've ever had in my life. To this day, I cannot imagine those boys, hands interlocked. Without thinking about the concepts of unity, strength, and Ubuntu, as G has mentioned. As a child, how is it that you're able to assume strength off the strength of your brother? How are you able to understand how to do that as a child? This was something that I was thinking about a lot because it was unfamiliar to me. I was raised to mind my business, every man for himself. From this experience, I learned that this mentality is a separation tool to feel love for others, to see yourself in others, and to stand for them as you would for yourself or your blood. That will stay with me forever. Our journey to the White Nile was one that stuck with me as well. I have never seen water so clear. I wondered where these waters have been. I wondered what these waters meant to my Ethiopian ancestors. When we climbed to the top of the mountain to see the pyramid that signified the most southern source of the White Nile, I couldn't help but feel like I was on top of the world. You can roll. In Gitega, we saw some of the sickest drummers in the world who truly ranged in age. No, seriously, there was an elderly guy and a little guy practically defying gravity as they jumped in the air and folded their bodies. As they performed, I could feel the vibrations all over my body. I thought about how maybe the entire village could hear this performance. They definitely did, because it wasn't 5 minutes after they started playing that a huge crowd surrounded us and the drummers. I thought about how strong those drummers had to be, stronger than anyone I know. I mean, they were doing things with their body I didn't even know was possible. They lifted these drums that had to be at least 100-something kilograms, or what seemed like it, because I tried to lift one and almost threw my back out in the process. And then they balanced it on their heads, marched, and banged the drum at the same time and stayed on beat. It was unreal. All while these events were going on, my team and I were working together to conduct community-based action research on the 1972 genocide of Burundi. During these interviews, it was hard for me to register what I was learning about the people of Burundi. I can admit that I was not prepared. I was learning about lifetimes of fights for life and refuge. I was learning about loss and separation. I was learning a lot about family and what that represented. In Burundi, it seemed like family wasn't limited to immediate and extended definitions. You care for the kids playing outside as if they were your own. You work together side by side like you grew up with each other. You knew no matter what, you were safe because your people will always support you, no matter what gets in the way. I could not be grateful and honored enough for this experience, and I'm glad I could share it with you all. Thank you.
First and foremost, just want to thank you for the opportunity to be part of the 9th annual conference on genocide and human rights in Africa and the diaspora. I feel honored to speak today about my experience visiting Burundi, and I also feel incredibly proud to be part of the NEIU community. A quick note about why I chose to go on this trip. I was in Professor Isatu's class, my 4th class with Professor Isatu, because I love her classes so much. And when she mentioned the trip back in October, I wanted so badly to be a part of it. And I knew it was the opportunity of a lifetime, and I'm so glad that I took part in it. So about this trip, around the beginning of it, we made a long trek all the way from Bujumbura to Buta, which took 3.5 hours. And the trip itself to get there was quite the experience. We drove our vans down some paved and some not so paved roads to finally reach our destination, which is Buta, specifically the Buta Minor Seminary. And while I knew a little bit about what had happened in Buta from reading a piece by Dr. Jody, one of the earlier speakers who accompanied us on this trip, nothing can take away the firsthand experience of being there and seeing this place where these atrocities unfolded and hearing the firsthand experience from one of its survivors, Father Zachary. While the bulk of the testimonies that we collected came from survivors of the 1972 genocide, the martyrs of the fraternity were killed during Burundi's civil war, which began in 1993. It was on April 30th of 1997 that the Buta Minor Seminary was attacked at dawn by an armed force that demanded that they divide by ethnicity. As Nasima said, Hutus were on one side, Tutsis were ordered on the other side, but instead these boys and young men united hand by hand together as children of God. And when they refused to divide, men armed with machetes attacked them. Dying children chanted psalms, prayed, made peace with God. Some even asked for forgiveness for their assailants. And in the end, 40 boys and young men were killed and 26 were seriously wounded. Soon after, the boys were named as martyrs, heroes who chose to embrace similarities over differences. And word spread of what happened. And soon after, St. John Paul II himself financed a building of the sanctuary to honor them, and it was erected 1 year later. It was indescribable, really, to see the graves of these 40 young men. And believe it or not, we stood out wherever we went in Burundi. So it wasn't surprising when the students of the seminary saw us and started following us on our trip around the seminary grounds after we visited the graves. If I could go back in time and do it again, I would have asked the students to interview them and get their perspective on what it's like to learn in a building where such atrocities and such heroism took place. In one of my pictures, you can actually see that there are bullet holes that still exist in the school buildings where children are learning today. I wonder how often they're reminded and think of what happened there. Father Zachary explained that in the days before the attack, there had been rumors, and he had been assured by government officials that protection would be provided. And he even told the boys not to worry, that they would be fine and it would be fine. And obviously it was not fine. He told us about how the attack unfolded at dawn and how the boys united by holding hands and refusing to separate by ethnicity, and how some boys' arms were cut off as a means to divide and maim them. He told us about how by the time protection did arrive, it was too late for most of the boys and young men. This experience was especially meaningful to me as a longtime Chicago public schools educator. Visiting Burundi, I saw so much beauty and so much hope for prosperity. I think that the young men in the seminary had it right when many of the adults around them did not. Love and unity, not division, is always the answer. One underlying theme that I've noticed throughout today is storytelling. It's so important to share their story and for survivors to share theirs as well. The only way for Burundians to recover from the trauma that unfolded is to talk about it. It not only must be acknowledged that it happened, but as others have stated, reparations extending far beyond acknowledgement are a requirement for healing. For a long time, people in Burundi were not allowed to speak of the genocide and civil war, and if they did, they talked in code. Stories have power to heal. They have the power to make change. I feel honored to be part of this trip so that we can share what happened and help more survivors heal and process and work together to ensure that it never happens again. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I am the last. Oh, thank you for your attention. This trip to Burundi was an intellectual, cultural, and deeply emotional experience, as you can tell, for all of us. I want to thank you in advance for listening to my let me go to my slides, reflectional piece about it. I have so many ideas about further research that can be done in Burundi using these archives that we procured by so much behind the scenes. There was so much strife happening, but we still were able to get these people into our room and record them, and it was just incredible. So I hope we can encourage people to use the archives and listen to their stories firsthand. We're secondhand now, but anyway, so further research is definitely possible, and I hope people do it. I want to just give my background. I brought a lot of my own conceptions about genocide and about Burundi along with me on the trip. I grew up next door to Skokie, and at the time when I was growing up, it was the largest settlement of World War II survivors in the world. And I was a young adult when the 1994 Rwanda genocide occurred. And so I knew about it. I've always been someone who likes to know what's going on. And of course, 10 years later, I saw Hotel Rwanda in the theaters. So that background about genocide really came with me. I also did all the research that was given to me about Burundi. And as a graduate assistant to Dr. Ntihirageza, I can never say it when I have to, Ntihirageza, I worked with her closely and I heard her own story. So I felt prepared. I thought I was ready. I'd even taught some students in 2021 online from Burundi. I knew a little bit about this country. I knew this story. I was like, I'm ready for this trip. Well, I thought I was prepared. On the way to Bujumbura and Frankfurt, I wanted to show what we stopped at first because this became a theme for my trip. We went to the Bernaplatz Memorial, which is a multiple block site dedicated to the 11,134 Holocaust victims who are from Frankfurt. It was created as a wall around the oldest Jewish cemetery in the city. And I was so struck by the balance of like hulking magnitude and tiny detailed personalization, because every person's name is there on that wall. And every name has stones on it, this permanent memorial. I don't know, many of you must know, the Jewish tradition is not to use flowers, it's to use stones because they're permanent. So this takes up an entire 2 city blocks, and it's in the middle of this bustling commercial city, and it's a part of everyday life for people in Frankfurt. I thought this was really important because it's a solid memorial within a very solid story that we all know about the Holocaust. So memorialization became this narrative that I was really interested in following during our trip to Burundi. I know many other people have been talking about it, and Dr. Janine will be talking about it tomorrow. So stories are a huge part of the memorialization, and this is where I saw a big competition. What is the story and what are we memorializing? We arrived at our hotel and we were ready to do our filming and survival testimonials. And we quickly realized through conversations with local people that we had to kind of circle our wagons and decide on our own story. What will we tell people why we were here? We decided to say that we're on a research trip. We're going to be careful and just say we're studying the culture in Burundi. But it really hit me when that conversation happened, how fresh and non-healed these wounds are in Burundi 50 years later. I was growing up with the Holocaust survivors 30 years later and things were going great. And here we are 50 years later and people can't even talk about it. We couldn't even say why we were there. That was really interesting. So the first memorial we visited was the Burundi Independence Monument. It's in Bujumbura. It's up on a beautiful hill overlooking Lake Tanganyika. And it's basically a gorgeous cemetery for the leaders of Burundi from the independence until the 1980s. This is a place that's filled with stories, but if we didn't have with us historian Patrick Hajayandi and Dr. Janine, we would not know them because you can't find anything out there. The people who are there, paid to be there, have machine guns and they charge you money to even walk around and look. So these stories are hidden and they have to be like pulled out kind of by force. So luckily we had someone there to tell us about it, but it's a monument that's virtually ignored by Burundians. There was a group of children that came running up the hill and I said, Janine, they're here for a field trip. And there's all these kids in school uniforms. And she was like, oh, Sarah, they don't come here. Because in Burundi, like paying the money to be at this memorial would be spending money that you could spend so many other better ways. It's like they need that money. And they were coming to look at us, of course. So this place didn't really feel like this celebration of independence to me. It felt like it was independent from society in Burundi. It wasn't a memorial. Who does it serve then? So two of the men memorialized here are also, I noticed, oops, sorry, on the money. So on the 100 Burundian franc note, Prince Rwagasore, the second prime minister of Burundi, who was only in power for 16 days before he was assassinated. And on the 100 franc note, it's Rwagasore again with Ndadaye, who was also only in power for a very short time. Both of these men were assassinated. Both of these men were at that memorial. And I also learned that on the 21st of October, it's a national holiday in Burundi that commemorates the assassination of Ndadaye. If this is what we are memorializing, these assassinations, don't we need the story to surround them? What is like? Where is the public memorialization of what is happening around these assassinations? That's not what's being celebrated. What about the regular people? You know. So you've heard a lot about the second memorial that we visited, which was Buta. The moving experience of being there was just indescribable. I will say that Buta's story is almost a ritualized one in the face of like all other stories that are absent. The Buta story is like a script. I felt like I was in a play walking around the school grounds. Father Zachary Bukuru, who was there, was hiding when the students were murdered. He told us that his life was spared so he could tell the true story. That's powerful. We've heard about powerful stories all day, but in Burundi, it's life or death, right? What story, how will we hear these stories? What story will spare one person and kill 40 others? A third memorial structure we visited is important to talk about. So this is Buta in the morning. I went out before. Okay, this third one is a hidden secret picture that Susie took. This is where the danger of stories came closest to our group in a place called Kibimba. The structure itself is just visible, like in this picture. It's like this huge white monument. There are no names, nothing. There is one date, but there's no names of any victim. The story is either a school or a gas station. And depending on who you believe, in 1993, the day Dadae was assassinated, the principal of the school rounded up students and teachers and put them in a classroom and locked it and burned them. Or someone else, a villager, locked them in a gas station and burned them. 80 students maybe, or 100, or more than 100. The stories vary. No one really can tell you any true story except for people who may have been there, and they're not able to. So the monument says never again. Plus jamais ça. So we were there, and one of our drivers told half the group, don't take any pictures. So we didn't, but it was too late because the other group was taking pictures. And as we noticed, we were slowly being surrounded by like children, and the whole village was kind of tracking us, following us. And all of a sudden these men appeared, demanding our IDs, demanding our cameras, our phones, and deleting every picture of this monument. So this is the last one that we have, because someone put their phone in their bra. This was a very scary situation. It was a long situation. We were really nervous. But I think the question that they were asking is, what are you doing here? What story are you going to tell? How dare you take the wrong story with you? And we later found out that one of the men who was intimidating us had a son who was killed that day, and he was Hutu. The story was that only Tutsis were killed. But this man was a Hutu, and his son was murdered. So for a memorial to be useful, don't we need the story to be clear? Mustn't the intentions of a huge, beautiful memorial like this, overlooking the most gorgeous countryside in the world, shouldn't we know what that's about? Shouldn't it align with what the people who live there believe and know? We asked our interviewees, who are pictured here, some of them, just a few of them, they're incredible and brilliant and strong survivors. And the most resounding shared sentiment that we heard from them was underscored by all of the interviewees, that their ideas about the future were bright. Their hopes for the children of Burundi were strong, and their dreams for their country to finally be at peace was #1 priority for all of them. Every single interview that I've watched. And how will this happen? How can this happen when these stories are so hidden? They've been misplaced, they've been displaced, they've been jammed and jumbled. And if the internal Burundian community can't agree on the stories, how can the global community support them? I guess that's where I would leave it, except this next slide, which is very interesting. Normally, when we think about Burundi or Rwanda, actually, we think about this 84% Hutu and 14% Tutsi and 2% Twa or whatever. But this statistic is more interesting to me. This is from the United Nations Population Fund. And it's so compelling because the ages here, that big red ball in the middle, almost half of the population is age 0 to 14. That's incredible. This is a group of people who almost all of these were not adults during the 1972 genocide. We're losing the stories. That's why this archive is so important for them, for the red ball. What will bridge this? I don't know. What do the children need? I don't know. I know that these recordings that we've made are an important piece of the healing, as Susie said, of this trauma, but only people in Burundi, with the help of this kind of archive, will be able to decide how their future will be and what their story will be. I have lots of ideas, but let's welcome more stories and let's dive into what people say in them. And really, I guess, hope that the research brings scholars worldwide to the story of Burundi, just like we know everything about the Holocaust, just like we know everything about Rwanda. Let's learn about Burundi and support their telling the stories. And let's get them right. Let's get the stories right for the kids. So thank you. I'd like to, if you have any questions for the audience, for the panel.
Thank you very, very, very much. I am so amazed and proud of you. If I say that I'm proud of Northeastern Illinois University, it might sound as if I'm saying so because I'm a professor here. But the truth is that I love my students. They're extremely smart. And I know, this is how I know they're smart. I always learn something from them. You know, and I tell my students, you challenge me, and they take it up and they challenge me. And here I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot from you, and I'm in honor, and I'm amazed, and I thank you for taking this trip. You know, I haven't been to, well, I've been to South Africa, but other than South Africa, the only country I've been is where I was born, in Nigeria. I've been meaning to visit other countries, so you beat me to the punch. And I thank you. I take your stories seriously. So I think we have time for questions before I conclude. Yes, I said. Okay. Could you give a microphone so that we hear every word?
If I say that you guys really make us look wonderful, it's not an understatement. You guys are just phenomenal. And I always say it in class, but you really are. Thank you for your insightful reflections, really. And this is something I would really love to emphasize, especially as a JIRAD member. This is a huge success. Janine, don't take this. You don't like to be thanked, but thank you so much for making it happen. Really, I mean, yeah, they really are phenomenal. But this is the importance. We can teach facts. We can talk about this the whole day as a matter of fact, as a research, as a scholarship. However, what you guys were talking about in terms of how this trip really affects who you are as a person, you can never teach that. So I always encourage my students or anybody, go somewhere else and feel the feel, because you can read books after books about Burundi or Ethiopia or anything. You will never feel that unity or humanity or the sense of safety. You just feel it. There is nothing that I can do to make you understand what it is like. So it's very, very important. And you magnified that for us and how this is important and how this is educational. These trips are not just tourism, it is educational. So thank you so much for bringing all of it, right? All of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We always talk about that, right? All of it here and sharing it openly, being vulnerable, right? So I really thank you.
All right. Uh-oh. Can you hear me? All right. Hey, team, Murakoze. All right. I know that the first word you understood when you were there, right? Thank you so much for just being in the field for us all. Thank you for being in Burundi. I'm from Rwanda and I have never been in Burundi. and it's my next door. But what is most interesting is how you guys have managed to go to the field and listen to the stories and bring them here and share with us. Thank you so much. And also, I loved the images. I didn't know about those memorial sites that you guys managed to visit. They really tell a lot of stories. And my question to you, any one of you can just answer, right? So these are stories which were not, they were not told for the past 50 years. So what were the reactions when you approached these people who survived the genocide, but their stories have never been told? What were their reactions when you were asking about these questions around the genocide? That's number one. Oh, do you want to answer that, or can I continue first?
You can continue so that
All right, so I want to know what were the reactions. And I also come from a nation which also experienced the genocide. And we do have commemorations every year to remember those who lost their lives and those who survived. Is there anything like that in Burundi? I just wanna know. If not, from the research or the interactions you had with people, what are their thoughts around that? What is their understanding around what happened to them and how they may be commemorating that in the future?
Thank you.
So regarding the reactions of those that we had talked to, there's a couple trends that I've noticed. Someone touched on this earlier, but a lot of many of the people that we spoke to talked about forgiveness and how they were able to have meals and have celebrations and, holidays with people who had actually taken part in healing their family members. And I feel as if the general tone is that they want so badly for healing to happen. As we were interviewing, and I was so honored to be able to interview a few of the survivors who talked to us, and many of them started crying, but it was a process. You could tell as the story was going on, they were recollecting these details of what happened. And as more details were coming in their head, as they were recollecting the story of what happened, that's when they were starting to realize what exactly they were sharing. And that's when they started crying, and you could get that feeling that they were truly remembering the experiences. But I will say another trend that I noticed was the sense of hopefulness. Through so many of the survivors, they kept talking about young people and how young people have the capacity to make change in Burundi and to develop the country, since it is known to be the poorest country in the world. They kept talking about how if we have young people who have this mind where we can unite and come together and embrace our similarities over our differences, that's how we can heal and get past what happened. So yeah, those were a few of the trends that I noticed in terms of reaction.
Most of the people were very willing to talk to us, but there were some that said absolutely no. Not many, but there was some that said, no way, we're not doing this. The story of this one gentleman, though, he was 72 years old. When he was 20 years old, he was captured. I guess in a school was attacked or something to that nature. And him and a lot of the students ran. He was captured and he was imprisoned in one room for 371 days. That just gripped my heart when he said that. I'm like, oh my God. In one room, he was not allowed to leave this room for 371 days.
He also talked about how if it wasn't for the fact that he was in prison for 371 days, everyone else who had been rounded up and captured had been killed. And it was his experience in prison that led to his survival.
He's the one that told us about the woman whose baby was killed with the spear too.
Just to add to that too, I think there was a sense of relief to be able to talk about their story, to tell their stories.
In terms of the second question, I think Janine would be the best to ask because I don't think there are any commemorative days for survivors and victims, are there? I mean, the interpreters told me that it was just the day of the assassinations was.
Years later, now they're opening up. So this is like the beginning. So this is the beginning, but the question is, to link to your question is, how do they manage? In French, we say gérer. I don't know if it delivers manage, like how do you take it in that? What do you do with it? Like the remains, the clothes they found, all of them. Where do they go? What do they do? I mean, in Burundi, you're not supposed to show bodies. And I don't even know if they came to me and say, "Where is your father? We found his body." Would they say, "Oh, go put his bones somewhere"? No, I don't think I would say, "Go ahead, use them." I said, "Let me please take care of them myself," right? So what do you do with the remains? And this is a small country and people knew where the bodies were. You know, I'm writing a short piece and the title is Living with the Bones and Perpetrators. They knew the perpetrators. The survivors knew the killers of their loved ones. And they lived with the bones of mass graves, right? From mass graves. So they'll be growing their corn and they see a bone that, shows up and they take it and push it on the side, but they couldn't talk about the bones they saw, you see? So they had to be quiet. So living with the bones and the perpetrators in silence all the way to 2022. You see, so no, memorization is going to be, I mean, it's insane. It's hard to even manage because then culturally, people are supposed to remember. I mean, we're not supposed to talk about the dead. You're not supposed to, you're just supposed to be quiet. We're trying to really, we're trying to make sure that these stories, like for example, and I take a moment to really address my group. Now I feel like nicknaming them the Burundian ambassadors, not the American ambassadors, but the Burundian ambassadors. Those are the Burundian ambassadors. From the stories I just heard, it's truly beautiful. But the fact that we're getting those stories and we can add them to the digital archive, that's huge, right? The fact that we have these stories being translated and transcribed, and they are going to be interactive stories that can be accessed all over the world. So that's I'm hoping that can help. Just a tiny way of trying to help. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think somebody's raising.
Questions online.
Okay. Yeah. Yes.
All right, so we have a comment from Cecil Johnson. It is interesting how the panel stories are different. Those who were overwhelmed by reconnecting to the motherland, that was so beautiful. How will these stories now be used? Will the final product be shared with the interviewees?
As I understand it, yes, we are making our digital archive will, the processing of the videos and transcribing and interpreting is going on now, and these will be available online. And we've gotten not only the ones we collected, but Janine has been collecting also, and we have from Petra Kajayandi, who is the historian that we worked with in Burundi. He has sent his videos as well. So this will be a really giant, amazing archive, and it will be available to everyone on a website.
Wonderful.
And
Okay, yes. Could you use the microphone?
Did they mention what is the reasons that they couldn't say anything before? That it was a political situation, that they couldn't, they tell them not to say anything, or they were able to talk to their own families about it, or like now the children know about the situation. I know that, want to reshare these stories later on for the future generations, but did they mention the reasons why they couldn't do that before? It was a political and cultural thing, as Dr. Janine said. Yeah, it was definitely cultural. There was no pretty much remains that anyone had of like their loved ones. So there were no pressure from like the political part of it or like the government that there was like, no.
That's the part that we didn't really talk about, but so many people were displaced after that because they were running for their lives. So not being able to talk about it was also a factor of being terrified for your life if you talk about it. Right? I mean, I don't want to.
Survivors that if they like this, I mean, I was there, of course. And so if anybody did talk about, if I said I lost my father, when they tell somebody, they would take my mother to jail, and the chances of her coming back was close to zero. So we were taught to not talk about it. So you did not lose a father, you did not lose a brother. And if you happen to have lost somebody, it's because they were enemies of the nation. That's it. So don't it's no story to be told. So yeah.
Okay, just one more contribution and keep it short.
Okay, I'll be quick. Thank you so much. You guys are doing a great job. And one thing just came into my mind is that although I asked about commemoration, even in Rwanda, some people say they have their own way to remember their dead. So Prof. Janine has also mentioned about how do they cope, how do they manage? So I wonder, during your conversations with them, did they mention some other ways, their own ways through which they do remember or commemorate? Because it's also a way of healing some wounds. Okay.
Well, I will say one quick note. I think for many, it was very hard to commemorate victims because many of them no longer had pictures of their loved ones. Oftentimes they were literally burned. So we actually heard from some survivors who had no pictures to even remember their loved ones who had died.
But even with all of that, though, the one gentleman, the older gentleman, the 72-year-old, the one thing that stood out with him, and to me it was amazing, just absolutely amazing. So much hope. He said that he believes that the differences will be resolved, but he said he believes that the new generation, the younger generation will have to do it, but he believes that it will be resolved. He did say that.
Okay, so let me first really thank you individually, each of you. Those of you who play football, American football, or know about it, I don't know anything except one word. It's a phrase, actually, it's supposed to be a sentence, but just Hail Mary it. Just Hail Mary it. So when I heard it, I was just watching my son's game and I said, what? Did they just say a whole sentence, a sentence in a verb? And I was excited as a linguist. But when we thought about this project with my team, we kept thinking, who do we go with? How do we select those who can go? And I'll try to make this quick. We just said, you know what? selection. Let's go one by one, faculty. And oh, Olivia just left. So Olivia was instrumental in sending us like G. Yes, and Nasima, thank you so much. So we just went with by faculty, right? Let's just do it that way. I can't tell you how grateful I am. Not only from what you just heard, but these are like bees, you know, work bees, those bees that go to work and bring, you know, honey and make things happen. They took the project, owned it, did everything they could do to make it a successful project. I can't tell you, each of them took it on as their own project from day one until we came back. I watched you guys do magic. Here is the truth. Technology, I don't know anything about it. In fact, this is how you know I don't know. I bought in a recorder, audio recorder, and I thought it was a video recorder. And I had it, kept it safe, and it's new, I'm going to use this. So I kept saying, I have two cameras, two video cameras. I had one. The other one was audio recorder, and we didn't find out until the morning when my husband was packing. I said, you thought, where's the second camera, video camera? I said, it's right there. That was an audio. So that's how bad it is. But what I did, I took everything, put in a suitcase. That's all I did. And I just, here you go. And they had to figure out how that works. In addition to knowing how to interview, what we're going to do, they took it all. Oh, I am so sorry. I have to apologize first, but I can't thank you enough. Each of you did an amazing job there. I am so proud of you. Coming to the stories you just told, my brain is going like, where do we put these stories? I'm already thinking about the digital archive. I'm already thinking about, of course, you know, I'm at some kind of publication. And I really hope you present at the Student Symposium in April, because these are stories worth telling what you learned one by one, the complementarity. That's like you each told a story that's like a page of a book, you know, just beautiful. So very well organized. Thank you so much for this gift. It's just, you made, yeah, you really, my heart is full. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Janine. Just Hail Mary. Yeah, I can't think of a better way to end today than to get back to the wonderful work by our students. It can be summarized just by one word used by one of them, memorialization. And we remember in order not to die. And as people, you know, as a professor of literature, I know that without stories, we are nothing. So basically, but we have to also to warn ourselves to beware of the stories we tell ourselves, because we gradually become the stories we tell. As people say, as one of us said here, I think Jean-Baptiste, if I do not speak, I will suffocate. But the flip side of it is that if I do not listen, my heart will suffocate. So every story needs another story in order to make sense. As my people say, any story that does not seek to save your enemy is dangerous. Any story that does not seek to save your enemy is dangerous. So it all boils down to the question of how we all can heal, and we heal by seeking to save our common humanity, which goes back to what one of you presented, this one word that I love about the Southern African people, Ubuntu. So I'm from West Africa. We don't use the word, but I've taken it as, yeah, it's now part of my vocabulary. It's all about our common humanity. And so I thank you all for ending this day with this beautiful project. And we're looking forward to tomorrow. Thank you very much. And there's still food here, so please come and grab food and be strong. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I'll show it to you on my phone. I sure did. No, to your phone. Yeah, I asked everybody for their phone number and I sent the invitation to them. How you doing?